My wife smiled at me every morning like nothing was wrong, so I smiled back, while slowly moving assets, documenting evidence, and befriending her lover's wife. She never saw the trap until it closed. The coffee maker gurgled to life at 6:15, same as every weekday for the past 8 years. Jenna emerged from our bedroom in her navy business suit, hair already perfect, makeup applied with the precision of a woman who understood the value of appearances. She kissed my cheek with practiced warmth, her lips tasting of mint and morning routine. "Have a good day at work, honey," she said, adjusting my collar with the same gentle touch she'd used when we were newlyweds. Her green eyes met mine with that familiar sparkle, the one that used to make my chest tighten with affection. Now it just made me wonder what she was hiding. "You too, sweetheart," I replied, matching her tone perfectly. "Don't work too late." She laughed, that musical sound that had charmed me at a company party 9 years ago. "You know me. Always something urgent at the office." Yes, I thought, watching her gather her purse and laptop bag. I'm starting to know exactly what that something is. After her car disappeared down our tree-lined street in suburban Portland, I waited exactly 15 minutes. Then I grabbed my own keys and drove in the opposite direction, not toward my consulting firm's downtown office, but to the law offices of Henderson and Associates on the east side. Margaret Henderson had been my attorney for 3 years, handling business contracts and the occasional real estate deal. She was sharp, discreet, and had no social connections to Jenna's circle of HR professionals and wine-tasting friends. Perfect for what I needed. "Cole Merrick," she said, rising from behind her mahogany desk as her secretary showed me in. "This is becoming a regular thing. Asset protection again?" "Something like that." I settled into the leather chair across from her, noting how the morning light caught the silver threads in her auburn hair. Margaret was probably 50, with the kind of competent air that made you trust her with your deepest secrets. "I need to move some retirement funds. Quietly." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Marital trouble?" "Let's call it prudent financial planning." She opened a fresh legal pad and uncapped her pen. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "Yesterday would be good. Last month would be better." Margaret had handled enough divorces to read between the lines. She didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Instead, she outlined the process for establishing an irrevocable trust, the paperwork required to transfer assets, and the legal protections such moves would provide. "Your sister Sarah is still willing to serve as trustee?" she asked. "She's expecting your call." "And Jenna doesn't suspect anything?" I thought about my wife's cheerful goodbye kiss, the way she'd hummed while packing her lunch, the casual mention of another late night at the office. "Jenna thinks I'm predictable. Boring, even. She's not wrong. I've been the same reliable husband for 8 years. Same job, same routines, same conversations about weekend plans and grocery lists. But predictable doesn't mean stupid." Margaret made a note. "When did you first suspect?" The question hit harder than I'd expected. When had I first noticed the small changes? The way Jenna had started putting her phone face down during dinner? Her sudden interest in weekend conferences and networking events? The fact that our conversations had become increasingly superficial, like she was reading from a script? "3 months ago," I said finally. "She came home from a work trip to Seattle, and something was different. Not obvious. Jenna's too smart for obvious. But she was lighter, happier, like she had a secret that made everything else easier to bear." "Including her marriage?" "Especially her marriage." Margaret set down her pen and leaned back. "Cole, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Once we start moving assets, there's no going back to the way things were. Even if you're wrong about Jenna, even if there's an innocent explanation, there isn't." The certainty in my voice surprised us both. Margaret studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Let's protect what's yours." We spent the next hour discussing trusts, LLCs, and the careful choreography required to move money without triggering automatic notifications to joint account holders. By the time I left her office, the morning fog had burned off, revealing one of those crisp October days that made Portland feel like the center of the universe. I drove to my actual office, a converted warehouse space I shared with two other independent consultants. My business specialized in helping mid-sized companies optimize their supply chains. Not glamorous work, but it paid well and gave me the flexibility to handle my own schedule. That flexibility was about to become very important. "You're late," observed Danny Reeves, my office mate who ran a digital marketing consultancy from the desk next to mine. "Hot date with a spreadsheet?" "Something like that." I powered up my laptop and pulled up the shared cloud account Jenna and I used for family photos, documents, and calendar coordination. She'd suggested the setup 2 years ago as a way to stay organized. "Transparency in marriage," she'd called it. "No secrets between us." Right. I navigated to the recently modified files section and found what I was looking for, a folder labeled JA Personal that hadn't existed last week. Inside were photos from her Seattle trip, but not the conference shots she'd shown me. These were restaurant photos, scenic views from the waterfront, and several selfies taken in what was clearly a hotel room. A nice hotel room. Nicer than the conference hotel she'd claimed to stay at. I opened the metadata on the photos and cross-referenced the timestamps with Jenna's official itinerary. According to her calendar, she'd been in meetings during several of the photo sessions. According to the GPS data embedded in the images, she'd been at Pike Place Market, Cary Park, and a wine bar in Belltown, with someone who knew the city well enough to play tour guide. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "Crazy busy today, might be late again. Order pizza for dinner?" I stared at the message, noting the exclamation point she'd started using in her texts. When had Jenna become an exclamation point person? The woman I'd married was more subtle, more reserved. This version of my wife was performing enthusiasm for an audience of one. "No problem," I texted back. "Love you." "Love you too," came the immediate reply. 3 exclamation points in 2 messages. Either Jenna had discovered caffeine, or she was overcompensating for something. I spent the rest of the day working on a legitimate project for a lumber company in Eugene, but my mind kept drifting to the photos in the cloud folder. By 5 o'clock, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. I called Ray Kiernan. Ray was a private investigator I'd met through a client whose company was dealing with employee theft. He was ex-Portland PD, early 60s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen every variety of human dishonesty. More importantly, he was thorough, discreet, and had no connection to my social circle. "Cole Merrick," he said when he answered. "Didn't expect to hear from you again. Supply chain problems?" "Personal problems." A pause. "I see. You want to meet?" "Your office. 1 hour." Ray's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service, the kind of anonymous location where people went to handle the messy details of their lives. The waiting room smelled like coffee and disappointment. "Marital surveillance," Ray said after I'd explained the situation. He didn't seem surprised. "It's about 60% of my business. What's your timeline?" "I need to know everything. Who, where, how long it's been going on, and whether there are financial implications I should worry about." "That's a comprehensive package. Could take weeks." "I have weeks. What I don't have is peace of mind." Ray opened a file folder and pulled out a standard contract. "My rate is $200 a day plus expenses. I'll need a retainer. Money's not an issue." I pulled out my checkbook, the one connected to my personal account that Jenna rarely monitored. "I need this done right." "What about confrontation? Some clients want to be present when—" "No confrontation, not yet. I want information first, evidence, then I'll decide what to do with it." Ray nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Most people let their emotions drive the bus, and they end up making things worse for themselves. You strike me as more methodical." "Methodical. Yes. That was exactly what I intended to be. I drove home through the early evening traffic, past the familiar landmarks of my neighborhood, the coffee shop where Jenna and I used to meet for weekend breakfast, the park where we'd talked about buying a bigger house someday, the elementary school we'd discussed when we were still planning to have children together. All of it felt different now, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes, the eyes of a man whose wife smiled at him every morning while planning her escape. Jenna's car was already in the driveway when I pulled up. Through the kitchen window, I could see her moving around, probably starting dinner despite her claim of being too busy for anything but pizza. She liked to cook when she was thinking through problems, a habit I'd found endearing for 8 years. Now I wondered what problems she was trying to solve. "Hey, stranger," she called as I walked through the front door. "Change of plans. I picked up ingredients for that pasta dish you like." She was wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. This was weekend Jenna, relaxed Jenna, the version of my wife who used to make me feel like the luckiest man in Portland. "Smells amazing," I said, kissing her forehead. "How was your crazy busy day?" "Oh, you know. Meetings, emails, more meetings. Sometimes I think corporate life is designed to prevent actual work from happening." She laughed and stirred something on the stove. "How was your day? You seemed distracted this morning?" Distracted. Interesting choice of words from someone who'd been mentally absent from our marriage for months. "Just thinking about the Henderson account," I said, which was technically true. "Complex logistics. Well, try to leave work at work. We barely see each other anymore." The irony was so thick I could taste it. We barely saw each other because she was busy creating a parallel life with someone else, but somehow this was a problem we shared equally. "You're right," I said. "We should plan something special. Maybe a weekend trip?" Jenna's hand paused for just a moment before resuming its stirring motion. "That sounds lovely. Let me check my calendar. I think I have a conference coming up, but after that, another conference. How convenient." We ate dinner at the kitchen table, making conversation about her co-workers, my clients, and the neighbor's new fence. Normal married couple talk, the kind of comfortable dialogue we'd perfected over 8 years. Except now I was listening for subtext, watching for tells, analyzing every pause and gesture. Jenna was good. She maintained eye contact, asked follow-up questions, and laughed at my moderately funny stories. If I hadn't seen those hotel room selfies, if I hadn't noticed the exclamation points and the mysterious conferences, I might have convinced myself I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining the way she kept her phone face down throughout dinner, or the fact that she'd changed her passcode. I'd noticed when she'd asked me to check her calendar last week, and I'd automatically started typing the old code. After dinner, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. Jenna curled up against my side, her head on my shoulder, and for a moment I felt a stab of genuine grief for what we were losing, or what we'd already lost, depending on how long this had been going on. "Cole," she said during a commercial break. "Yeah? Are we okay? I mean, really okay? Sometimes I feel like we're just going through the motions." The question hit me like a punch to the chest. Here was my opening, the chance to have an honest conversation about whatever was happening between us. 6 months ago, I would have taken it. I would have told her about my concerns, asked direct questions, and trusted her to tell me the truth. But that was before the hotel room photos, before the mysterious conferences and the changed passcode and the feeling that my wife was performing our marriage instead of living it. "We're fine," I said, stroking her hair. "Just busy. Work stress. You know how it is." She relaxed against me. "Yeah, I know how it is." The movie resumed, some romantic comedy that required minimal attention. Jenna fell asleep before the credits rolled, her breathing deep and even against my chest. I sat there in the dark, holding my wife and planning her destruction. Because that's what this was going to be, I realized. Not a conversation or a confrontation or even a traditional divorce. Jenna had chosen deception over honesty, performance over authenticity. She was playing a game where I wasn't supposed to know the rules. But I was a quick learner. and I was very, very good at games. Ray called me 3 days later with his first report. I was sitting in my office pretending to review supply chain optimization proposals while actually researching asset protection strategies when my phone buzzed. "We need to meet," he said without preamble. "Not over the phone." I found him at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland, the kind of place that served fair trade espresso to freelancers and graduate students. Ray looked like he belonged in a police station, not a hipster cafe, but he'd chosen a corner table with clear sight lines to both exits. Old habits. "Your wife has a second life," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the small table. "And it's more elaborate than you might expect." I opened the envelope and found photographs, documents, and a typed summary in Ray's neat handwriting. The photos showed Jenna entering and leaving an apartment building in the Pearl District, not the kind of place someone visited for meetings or errands. This was residential, upscale, the type of building that required key fobs and security deposits. "Apartment 847, Ray said, sipping his black coffee. "Lease signed 14 months ago. Rent is $2,800 a month, paid automatically from an account at First National. We don't bank at First National." "No, you don't, but Jenna Ardell does." I looked up from the photos. Ardell is her maiden name, which she's been using for more than just the apartment. Credit card, gym membership, subscription services. She's built a complete parallel identity. The implications hit me like cold water. This wasn't a recent affair or a moment of weakness. This was systematic, planned, sustained deception on a scale I hadn't imagined possible. "How long?" I asked. "Based on the financial records I could access, at least 14 months. Possibly longer if she was more careful in the beginning." 14 months. I thought back to last summer, trying to remember what had been different about Jenna's behavior. Had there been signs I'd missed? Changes in her routine that I'd attributed to work stress or normal marital evolution? "There's more," Ray said, pulling out a second set of photos. "Your wife isn't the only one with secrets." The new photos showed a man leaving the Pearl District apartment. He was tall, well-dressed, probably mid-30s, with the kind of confident posture that suggested success and self-satisfaction. In one photo, he was kissing Jenna goodbye at the building's entrance. "Damon Vossel," Ray said, consulting his notes. "Age 34, works as a business consultant, lives in Lake Oswego with his wife and 2 kids. Married." Of course he was married. The betrayal was apparently a team sport. "What kind of consulting?" "The vague kind. His company website is all corporate speak and stock photos. Could be legitimate, could be a front for something else. I'm still digging." I studied the photos, memorizing Damon Vossel's face. He was handsome in a generic way, like a model from a business magazine. The kind of man who probably drove a German sedan and belonged to a country club. Everything I wasn't. "His wife," I said. "What do you know about her?" Ray smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd ask. Tessa Rellin Vossel, age 31, runs a small marketing firm from home. No kids of her own, but she's stepmother to Damon's children from his first marriage." "Does she know?" "Hard to say, but she's been asking questions. My contact at the credit monitoring service says she ran a report on her husband last month. Could be routine, could be suspicion." I leaned back in my chair, processing the information. Jenna and Damon thought they were conducting a private affair, but they were actually part of a larger web of deception that included spouses, finances, and possibly business irregularities. The situation was more complex than a simple case of infidelity. It was also more vulnerable. "I want you to find out everything about Damon Vossel," I said. "Business dealings, financial situation, legal problems, traffic tickets, everything. And I want contact information for his wife." "You thinking of reaching out to her?" "I'm thinking of a lot of things." Ray gathered the photos and documents back into the envelope. "Cole, I have to ask, what's your end game here? Some clients want evidence for divorce proceedings, others want leverage for reconciliation. What are you hoping to accomplish? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since this whole thing started. What did I want? A confession from Jenna? An apology? A chance to rebuild our marriage on honest ground? No. Those options had been available months ago, before the Pearl District apartment, and the secret bank account, and the systematic construction of a life that didn't include me. Jenna had made her choice when she decided to solve our marital problems by creating an escape route instead of having a conversation. I want her to understand what she's lost, I said finally. And I want her to understand that actions have consequences. Ray nodded slowly. That's a dangerous road, Cole. Once you start down it, you might not like where it leads. I'm already on it. The only question is whether I'm walking or running. I drove back to my office with the envelope of evidence on the passenger seat, feeling like I was carrying explosives. The photos of Jenna kissing another man should have made me angry, but instead, I felt oddly detached, like I was reviewing someone else's life. Maybe this was what people meant when they talked about the stages of grief. I'd moved past denial and anger into something that felt like cold acceptance. My marriage was over. Had been over for more than a year, apparently. Now it was just a matter of managing the ending. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop and began researching Tessa Relin-Vossel. Her marketing firm had a professional website showcasing campaigns for local restaurants and retail shops. The headshot showed a woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes, the kind of person who probably noticed details and asked good questions. Her business address was a P.O. box, but her LinkedIn profile mentioned she was a member of the Portland Women Entrepreneurs Network. They held monthly networking events at various downtown venues. According to their website, the next meeting was Thursday evening at a hotel bar near the waterfront. I made a note in my calendar. That evening, Jenna came home with flowers, a mixed bouquet from the grocery store, the kind of gesture that would have seemed sweet if I didn't know she was probably feeling guilty about something. She arranged them in a vase while telling me about her day, her voice bright with the kind of forced cheer that made me wonder what she was overcompensating for. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, pulling a bottle of wine from her bag. "I thought we could open this tonight. It's from that winery we visited on our anniversary trip." Our anniversary trip. 2 years ago, when we'd driven down to the Willamette Valley for a long weekend of wine tasting and bed and breakfast romance. Back when I'd believed we were building something together instead of just maintaining appearances. "That's thoughtful," I said, accepting the bottle. "What's the occasion? Does there need to be an occasion for celebrating our marriage?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was ready to address directly. I opened the wine and poured 2 glasses, noting how Jenna watched my face as if she was trying to read my reaction to her gesture. "To us," she said, raising her glass. "To us," I echoed, meeting her eyes over the rim of my wine glass. We drank the wine with dinner and talked about safe topics: work, weather, weekend plans. Jenna seemed more relaxed than she'd been in months, as if the flowers and wine had somehow reset our relationship to an earlier, easier time. I played along, asking about her projects and sharing stories from my own work. But I was also watching her, cataloging the small details I'd learned to notice. The way she kept her phone in her purse instead of on the table. The fact that she'd changed into different clothes when she got home, as if she needed to shed her daytime identity before becoming my wife again. The careful way she edited her stories, mentioning coworkers by first name only and keeping her schedule vague. After dinner, we settled on the couch with the rest of the wine. Jenna curled up next to me, and I found myself studying her profile. The curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with at that company party 9 years ago. But she was also a stranger who'd been living in my house, sharing my bed, and planning her exit strategy for over a year. "Cole?" she said, interrupting my thoughts. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd met at a different time? Like, if we were different people? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if we got together too young, before we really knew who we were supposed to become. Like maybe we're trying to force something that doesn't fit anymore. Here it was, the opening for the conversation we'd been avoiding for months. The chance to talk honestly about the distance between us, the way we'd been sleepwalking through our marriage, the feeling that we were more like roommates than lovers. 6 months ago, I would have seized this moment. I would have told her I'd been having similar thoughts, that I'd noticed the changes in our relationship, that I wanted to work together to figure out what came next. But that was before I knew about Damon Vossel and the Pearl District apartment and the secret bank account. Before I understood that while I'd been worrying about our marriage, Jenna had been actively replacing it. I think, I said carefully, that people change, and sometimes relationships have to change with them. She nodded, seeming relieved that I wasn't going to fight her philosophical mood. Exactly. Like, maybe the problem isn't that we're failing at marriage. Maybe the problem is that we're trying to stay the same when everything else is evolving. The rationalization was elegant, almost convincing. If I didn't know about her double life, I might have found myself agreeing with her. We could have had a mature conversation about growing apart, about wanting different things, about the possibility of conscious uncoupling, or whatever term people used when they wanted to end a marriage without admitting anyone had done anything wrong. Instead, I was listening to my wife lay the groundwork for a narrative that would make her betrayal sound like personal growth. That's very philosophical, I said, refilling our wine glasses. Too philosophical? No, just unexpected. You've been thinking about this for a while? A slight pause. A few months, I guess. Haven't you? Some, I admitted. Though I've been focused more on practical concerns lately. Like what? Like making sure we're financially prepared for whatever comes next. You know me. I like to plan ahead. Jenna smiled, and for a moment it looked like her old smile, the genuine one from before she'd learned to perform our marriage. That's one of the things I've always loved about you. You think everything through. Loved. Past tense. We finished the wine and went to bed, where Jenna initiated intimacy for the first time in weeks. I responded, because refusing would have required explanations I wasn't ready to give. But the whole experience felt surreal, like I was participating in the physical maintenance of a relationship that had already ended. Afterward, she fell asleep quickly, her breathing deep and even beside me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her philosophical questions and her use of past tense and the way she'd seemed relieved when I'd agreed that relationships needed to evolve. She was preparing me for the end of our marriage, I realized, softening the ground for whatever conversation she was planning to have once her exit strategy was fully in place. The flowers, the wine, the intimate evening, it was all part of a careful campaign to make our eventual separation seem mutual and inevitable instead of what it actually was. A betrayal that had been 14 months in the making. I reached for my phone and composed a text to Ray. I want to accelerate the timeline, whatever it takes. Then I deleted the message without sending it. Jenna was playing a long game, and she was good at it. If I wanted to beat her, I needed to be better. I needed to be patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. Starting tomorrow. Thursday evening found me in the bar at the Heathman Hotel, nursing a whiskey and pretending to read emails on my phone. The Portland Women Entrepreneurs Network had taken over the back section of the lounge, and I'd positioned myself with a clear view of the entrance while maintaining enough distance to avoid seeming like I was eavesdropping. Tessa Relin Vossel arrived at 7:15, and I recognized her immediately from the photos on her business website. She was smaller than I'd expected, probably 5'4", with shoulder-length dark hair and the kind of focused energy that suggested she was always thinking 3 steps ahead. She wore a tailored blazer and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd built something from nothing. I watched her work the room for 20 minutes, making connections and exchanging business cards with the practiced ease of someone who understood networking as a necessary skill rather than a social pleasure. She was good at it, warm without being overly familiar, professional without being cold. When she stepped away from the group to check her phone, I made my move. "Excuse me," I said, approaching with what I hoped was the right combination of nervousness and determination. "Are you Tessa Rellin? I saw your work on the campaign for Meridian Bistro. Really impressive stuff." She looked up from her phone, and I caught a flicker of wariness in her dark eyes before her professional smile kicked in. "Thank you. I'm sorry. Have we met?" "Cole Merrick. I run a consulting firm downtown." I handed her one of my business cards, noting how she glanced at it before meeting my eyes again. "I've been thinking about hiring a marketing professional, and your name keeps coming up." "That's flattering. What kind of consulting do you do?" "Supply chain optimization. Not the most exciting field, but it pays the bills." I gestured toward the bar. "Can I buy you a drink? I'd love to hear about your approach to B2B marketing." She hesitated, and I could see her calculating. Was this a legitimate business opportunity or something else? The networking event was winding down, and several other women had already left. Making a connection with a potential client would justify staying longer. "Sure," she said finally, "but just one. I have an early meeting tomorrow." We found a quiet table away from the networking group, and I ordered another whiskey while she asked for a glass of white wine. For the first 10 minutes we talked shop, her background in marketing, my experience with mid-sized companies, the challenges of building a client base in Portland's competitive business environment. Tessa was smart, articulate, and clearly passionate about her work. Under different circumstances, I might have actually hired her, but I wasn't here for marketing advice. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, when our conversation hit a natural pause. Her guard went up immediately. "Depends on how personal." "How do you balance running a business with being married?" "I'm asking because my wife and I are both pretty career-focused, and sometimes it feels like we're ships passing in the night." The question was carefully calibrated, personal enough to shift our conversation, but not so direct as to raise immediate suspicion. Tessa relaxed slightly, perhaps recognizing the universal challenge of work-life balance. "It's definitely not easy," she said, swirling her wine. "Damon travels a lot for his consulting work, so we've had to get creative about staying connected. Date nights when he's in town, lots of texting and video calls when he's not." "What kind of consulting does he do?" "Business development mostly, helping companies expand into new markets." She paused, and I caught something in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty. "At least, that's what he tells me. Sometimes I think consulting is just a fancy word for it's complicated." There it was, the opening I'd been hoping for. Tessa had doubts about her husband's work, which meant she probably had doubts about other things too. "My wife's in HR," I said. "She's been traveling more lately too. Conferences, training seminars, networking events. Sometimes I joke that I see her LinkedIn connections more than I see her." Tessa laughed, but it sounded forced. "How long have you been married?" 8 years. You?" 3. Though we dated for 2 years before that. She took a sip of wine, then added, "Sometimes I wonder if I really know him, you know? Like, we live in the same house and share the same bed, but there are parts of his life that feel completely separate from mine." The vulnerability in her voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt a stab of guilt about manipulating her loneliness. But then I thought about Jenna's philosophical questions the other night, her careful preparation for our eventual separation, and the guilt evaporated. "That's exactly how I feel," I said, "like we're living parallel lives instead of a shared one." We talked for another hour, our conversation drifting from professional challenges to personal frustrations with the careful intimacy of two people who recognized similar wounds in each other. Tessa was lonely. That much was obvious. Her husband was absent more often than not, and when he was present, he was distracted by work stress and financial pressures she didn't fully understand. "He's been talking about taking on bigger clients," she said, finishing her second glass of wine. "Projects that would require even more travel, more time away. Part of me wonders if he's running towards something or away from something, you know?" "Away from what?" "I don't know. Responsibility, maybe? The reality of being married to someone who has her own career and opinions and needs." She shook her head. "Sorry, I don't usually dump on strangers like this." "We're not strangers," I said. "We're two people trying to figure out how to make marriage work in the modern world." She smiled, and for the first time that evening, it reached her eyes. "You're easy to talk to, Cole. Your wife is lucky." If only she knew. We exchanged contact information before leaving the hotel, with plans to meet again the following week to discuss a potential marketing project. Tessa seemed genuinely excited about the business opportunity, which made me feel like even more of a manipulator. But I pushed the guilt aside. I hadn't created this situation. I was just responding to it with the same level of strategic thinking that Jenna and Damon were using. The drive home took me through downtown Portland, past the Pearl District and the building where my wife maintained her secret apartment. I slowed as I passed, noting which windows were lit and wondering if she was there now, playing house with her consultant boyfriend while I drove home to an empty house and the pretense of a normal marriage. Jenna's car was in the driveway when I arrived, which meant she'd beaten me home despite claiming she'd be working late. I found her in the kitchen, already in her pajamas, making tea. "Hey," she said, looking up with a smile that seemed more genuine than usual. "How was your evening? You said you had a client dinner?" "Networking event, actually. Met some interesting people." I kissed her cheek, noting the faint scent of her perfume, the expensive stuff she usually saved for special occasions. "How was your late night at the office?" "Oh, you know, budget reviews and performance evaluations, thrilling stuff." She poured hot water over her tea bag, then added, "I might have to travel again next week. There's a conference in Seattle that could be good for my career." Seattle. The same city where she'd taken those hotel room selfies 3 months ago. "Another conference? Didn't you just get back from one?" "This is different. More focused on leadership development." She avoided my eyes, concentrating on her tea preparation with unnecessary intensity. "It's only 2 days, and the company's paying for everything." "Sounds like a great opportunity," I said, matching her casual tone. "Same hotel as last time?" A brief pause. "I'm not sure yet. HR is handling the arrangements." The lie came so easily that I almost admired her technique. No hesitation, no defensive body language, just a smooth deflection that made further questions seem unreasonable. "Well, I hope it's somewhere nice," I said. "You deserve a little luxury." She smiled and stood on her tiptoes to kiss me. "Thank you for being so understanding. I know I've been distracted lately with work stuff." Work stuff. Right. We went to bed early, and Jenna fell asleep quickly, probably exhausted from maintaining her double life. I lay beside her, listening to her breathing and thinking about my conversation with Tessa. 2 marriages, 2 sets of lies, 2 people who thought they were smarter than their spouses, but only one of us was building a comprehensive picture of what was really happening. The next morning, I called Ray from my office. "I made contact with Damon's wife," I said without preamble. "She's suspicious, but doesn't have proof. I think she'd be receptive to sharing information." "That's either very smart or very dangerous," Ray said. "Probably both." "What did you find out about Damon's business?" "Interesting question. His consulting firm exists, but it's basically a shell. No employees, no office lease, no significant contracts that I can find. He's either very good at hiding his income or he's not making much money." But he's paying for half of an expensive apartment in the Pearl District. Exactly. Which raises the question of where the money's coming from. I thought about Jenna's secret bank account, her family's wealth, and her mother's tendency to solve problems with financial support. What if he's not paying for it? You think your wife is funding their love nest? I think my wife comes from money, and her family would happily pay to help her transition out of an inconvenient marriage. Ray was quiet for a moment. That would change the dynamic significantly. If Jenna's family is involved, this isn't just about infidelity. It's about financial planning for divorce. Which means I need to move faster on asset protection. And it means Damon might not be the mastermind you think he is. He might just be a convenient excuse for a decision your wife already made. The possibility hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd been thinking of Damon as the catalyst for Jenna's betrayal, the exciting alternative that had made our marriage seem boring by comparison. But what if he was just a symptom of a deeper problem? What if Jenna had decided to end our marriage and then found someone to help her justify that decision? Keep digging, I told Ray. I want to know everything about their financial arrangements, and I want to know more about Jenna's family's involvement. What about Damon's wife? You planning to tell her what you know? I thought about Tessa's loneliness, her doubts about her husband's frequent absences, and her obvious intelligence. She deserved to know the truth about her marriage, but she also represented an opportunity I couldn't ignore. Not yet, I said, but soon. That weekend, Jenna announced she needed to spend Saturday afternoon shopping for professional clothes for her upcoming Seattle conference. She invited me to join her, but I declined, claiming I had work to catch up on. In reality, I wanted time alone in the house to search for additional evidence. I started in our bedroom, going through Jenna's dresser and closet with methodical care. I found nothing obvious, no hidden letters or suspicious receipts, but I did notice that several expensive items were missing. A silk scarf I'd given her for Christmas, a pair of designer earrings she'd inherited from her grandmother, a cashmere sweater she'd splurged on last year, items she might have moved to a second wardrobe in a second apartment. In her home office, I found more interesting material. Jenna was usually careful about her digital security, but she'd left her laptop open and logged in. I spent an hour going through her browser history, email drafts, and recently accessed files. Most of it was routine, work documents, online shopping, social media. But buried in her email drafts folder, I found something that made my chest tighten with cold anger. A partially written message to her sister in California. Know this is hard to understand, but I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Cole is a good man, but we want different things now. I've been trying to figure out how to have this conversation without destroying both our lives. Maybe it's better to make a clean break before we start resenting each other. The draft was dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks after our wine-fueled conversation about relationships needing to evolve. 3 weeks after she'd started laying the groundwork for our mutual separation. Except there was nothing mutual about it. While I'd been worrying about the distance between us, Jenna had been planning her exit strategy with the same careful attention she brought to her professional projects. I photographed the email draft with my phone, then continued searching. In her financial documents folder, I found bank statements for the First National account Ray had discovered. The deposits were exactly what I'd expected, regular transfers from her mother, occasional larger amounts that probably corresponded to family gifts or bonuses. But the withdrawals were more interesting. Beyond the apartment rent and utilities, there were charges for furniture, groceries, and household items. Jenna wasn't just maintaining a secret apartment. She was fully furnishing it, creating a complete alternate life. A life that was almost ready for her to move into permanently. I was still processing this information when I heard Jenna's car in the driveway. I quickly closed her laptop and returned everything to its original position, then retreated to my own office to pretend I'd been working on client proposals. Hey, she called from downstairs. I'm back. Want to see what I bought? Sure, I called back, noting how cheerful she sounded. Shopping for her new life had apparently put her in a good mood. She modeled 3 new outfits, asking for my opinion with the kind of genuine enthusiasm I hadn't seen from her in months. The clothes were beautiful, professional but feminine, expensive but not flashy, perfect for a successful woman starting a new chapter of her life. "You look amazing," I told her, and meant it. Jenna was beautiful, successful, and intelligent. In another timeline, we might have worked through our problems together. We might have had the honest conversation she was apparently planning to have with her sister. But in this timeline, she'd chosen deception over communication, and I'd chosen to respond in kind. "Thank you," she said, hanging the new clothes in her closet. "I want to make a good impression at this conference." "I'm sure you will," I said. "You always do." She smiled and kissed me, and for a moment we stood there in our bedroom, holding each other like a normal married couple planning for the future. But we weren't normal, and we weren't planning for the same future. We were two people who'd learned to lie so well that we could convince ourselves we were telling the truth. Monday morning brought rain and Ray's most comprehensive report yet. We met at a different coffee shop this time, one in Northwest Portland, that catered to the kind of people who discussed business over fair trade lattes and locally sourced pastries. "Your wife's family is more involved than we initially thought," Ray said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "The apartment lease, the bank account, even the furniture purchases, everything traces back to Ardell family money." I opened the folder and found financial records that painted a clear picture of coordinated deception. Jenna's mother had been making regular deposits to the First National account for over a year, while her brother had co-signed not just the apartment lease, but also a car loan for a vehicle I'd never seen. "She has a second car?" "Honda Civic, registered to the Pearl District address. Probably keeps it in the building's garage so you won't spot it around town." The level of planning was staggering. Jenna hadn't just been having an affair, she'd been constructing an entirely separate identity, complete with her own transportation, living space, and financial independence. What about Damon's role in all this? That's where it gets interesting. Ray pulled out a second set of documents. Damon Vossel's consulting business is struggling. No major clients, irregular income, and he's behind on his mortgage payments. But suddenly, 6 months ago, his financial situation improved dramatically. Let me guess. Mystery deposits that correspond to Jenna's family transfers. Exactly. Someone's been paying him a monthly stipend of $3,000. Officially, it's for consulting services provided to a company called Ardell Holdings. I recognized the name immediately. That's Jenna's mother's investment company. So either Damon is providing legitimate business consulting to your mother-in-law, or they're paying him to be available for their daughter's transition out of marriage. The implications were breathtaking. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a coordinated campaign involving multiple family members and significant financial resources. Jenna's family had essentially hired Damon to help facilitate their daughter's divorce by providing her with an alternative relationship that would make leaving me seem like a positive choice rather than a failure. "There's more," Ray said. I did some digging into Damon's background. 2 previous marriages, both ending in divorce, both involving allegations of financial impropriety. He has a pattern of getting involved with women who have access to money. Professional boyfriend. That's one way to put it. The other way is to call him a con artist who specializes in unhappy wives from wealthy families. I studied the photos of Damon again, seeing him with new eyes. He wasn't just my wife's lover. He was a hired emotional contractor, paid to make Jenna feel desired and understood while she worked up the courage to end our marriage. Does Jenna know about his history? Hard to say. If she does, she might not care. People believe what they want to believe, especially when it serves their purposes. I thought about Jenna's philosophical questions about personal growth and evolving relationships. Had she convinced herself that her feelings for Damon were genuine, or was she aware that their relationship was essentially a business transaction disguised as romance? What about his wife, Tessa? Clean as a whistle, successful business, no significant debts, no criminal background. She's exactly what she appears to be, a hard-working woman who married a man she doesn't really know. That evening I met Tessa for dinner at a restaurant in the Alberta district, ostensibly to discuss marketing strategies for my consulting firm. She'd spent the weekend developing a preliminary proposal, and her enthusiasm for the project was both impressive and guilt-inducing. "I've been thinking about your target demographic," she said, spreading papers across our table. "Mid-sized companies that are growing fast enough to need supply chain optimization, but not big enough to have dedicated internal resources." "That's exactly right," I said, genuinely impressed by her analysis. "How would you reach them?" We spent an hour discussing marketing channels, budget allocation, and campaign timelines. Tessa was clearly talented, and under different circumstances, I would have hired her immediately. But I had other priorities. "Can I ask you something?" I said, when our business discussion reached a natural conclusion. "Of course." "Last week you mentioned feeling like you and your husband were living parallel lives. Has that gotten better, or—" Her expression shifted from professional to personal, and I could see the loneliness she'd been carrying. "Actually, it's gotten worse. Damon's been even more distracted lately, and when I try to talk to him about it, he just says he's dealing with work stress." "What kind of stress?" "I wish I knew. He used to tell me about his projects, but lately everything is confidential or complicated, or you wouldn't understand the technical details. It's like he's speaking a different language." I leaned forward slightly, projecting the kind of concerned attention that encouraged confidences. "That must be frustrating." "It is. And the weird thing is, his mood has actually improved even though he claims to be stressed about work. He's been happier, more energetic, like he has some kind of secret that's making everything else easier to deal with." The description was painfully familiar. Jenna had shown the same pattern, claiming to be overwhelmed by work responsibilities, while simultaneously seeming lighter and more optimistic than she'd been in years. "Have you considered that maybe the secret isn't work-related?" I asked carefully. Tessa's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "I mean, sometimes when people start acting differently, it's because something in their personal life has changed. Not necessarily something bad, but something they're not ready to share yet." She set down her glass and studied my face. "Cole, are you trying to tell me something specific, or are we still talking hypothetically?" The moment had arrived, the decision point I'd been building toward for weeks. I could continue the subtle approach, gradually leading Tessa toward her own conclusions about her husband's behavior. Or I could show her the evidence and let the consequences unfold. I chose directness. "I'm trying to tell you that I think our spouses are having an affair with each other." The words hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. Tessa's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, denial, anger, and finally a kind of grim recognition. "You have proof," she said. It wasn't a question. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos Ray had taken of Jenna and Damon at the Pearl District apartment. Tessa studied each image carefully, her face growing paler with each swipe. "How long?" she asked finally. "At least 14 months, probably longer." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, her expression had hardened into something I recognized, the look of someone who'd just realized they'd been played for a fool. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her about the secret apartment, the parallel financial life, the family conspiracy to fund Jenna's transition out of marriage. I showed her the bank records, the lease documents, and the evidence of Damon's monthly payments from Ardell Holdings. "They're paying him," Tessa said, her voice flat with disbelief. "My husband is being paid to have an affair with your wife." "It looks that way." She was quiet for a long time, processing the information. Around us, the restaurant continued its normal evening rhythm, couples sharing appetizers, friends catching up over wine, families celebrating birthdays. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 2 marriages were disintegrating at table 12. "What do you want to do about it?" Tessa asked finally. I want them to understand what they've lost, and I want them to face consequences for what they've done. Revenge. Justice. She smiled grimly. Is there a difference? Sometimes, but not always. We talked for another 2 hours, sharing information and developing a strategy. Tessa was angry, angrier than I'd expected, but she was also methodical and intelligent. She wanted documentation of everything, legal protections for both of us, and a plan that would expose the full scope of the deception. I can't just divorce him and walk away, she said. Not when I know he's been living off payments from another woman's family while lying to my face every day. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Damon and your wife believe they're smarter than us. They think they can manipulate us into accepting whatever story they eventually decide to tell. She finished her wine and met my eyes. I want to show them how wrong they are. By the time we left the restaurant, we had the foundation of a plan. Tessa would begin documenting Damon's absences and financial irregularities, while I continued gathering evidence of Jenna's double life. We'd coordinate our efforts through secure communication channels and prepare for a confrontation that would expose everything at once. One more thing, Tessa said as we stood outside the restaurant. When this is over, when we've shown them exactly what we think of their little arrangement, I want to work with you on that marketing project. For real this time. Even after everything I've put you through tonight? Especially after tonight. You could have kept this information to yourself, let me figure it out on my own, or never figure it out at all. Instead, you trusted me with the truth. She extended her hand for a business-like shake. That's the kind of person I want to work with. I drove home through the rain, thinking about Tessa's anger and determination. She'd taken the news of her husband's betrayal better than I'd expected, but then again, she'd probably been suspicious for months. Sometimes confirmation of your worst fears was easier to handle than continued uncertainty. Jenna was already asleep when I got home, her breathing deep and even. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her sleep and thinking about the conversation she was planning to have with her sister, the email draft about making a clean break, before we started resenting each other. Too late for that, I thought. The resentment had already started. It was just flowing in a different direction than she'd anticipated. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. Thank you for tonight. Ready to get started whenever you are. I typed back, tomorrow, it's time to accelerate the timeline. Because I was done being patient, done being methodical, done pretending that my wife's careful campaign of deception deserved a measured response. Jenna wanted to evolve our relationship? Perfect. She was about to discover exactly what that evolution looked like when the other person stopped playing by the old rules. Jenna left for her Seattle conference on Thursday morning with 2 suitcases and a cheerful kiss, goodbye. I watched from the kitchen window as she loaded her car, noting that she'd packed more clothes than a 2-day business trip would require. She was probably planning to extend her stay, maybe make it a long weekend with Damon in their favorite city. Have a great conference, I called as she backed out of the driveway. I will, she called back, waving through her window. Love you. The words echoed in the suddenly quiet house. Love you. Past tense masquerading as present tense, a habitual phrase that had lost all meaning through repetition and deception. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then called Tessa. She's gone, I said. Damon left an hour ago. Told me he had meetings in Seattle through the weekend. Her voice was steady, controlled. Are you ready for this? More than ready. We'd spent the past 3 days finalizing our plan. While Jenna and Damon enjoyed their romantic getaway, Tessa and I would gather the final pieces of evidence we needed, coordinate with our respective attorneys, and prepare for a confrontation that would expose the full scope of their deception. Step 1 was accessing the Pearl District apartment. Ray had provided me with the building's security protocols and Jenna's apartment schedule. Thursday afternoons were typically empty. Jenna would be traveling, and Damon would be at his legitimate consulting meetings before joining her in Seattle. The building's concierge knew Jenna as Ms. Ardell, a quiet tenant who traveled frequently for business. I arrived at the Pearl District building at 2 o'clock, dressed in a business suit and carrying a briefcase that contained cameras, document scanners, and other equipment Ray had recommended. The concierge, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, barely glanced up when I approached his desk. "I'm here to check on Ms. Ardell's apartment," I said, presenting a business card that identified me as a representative of Ardell Holdings. "She's traveling, but there were some maintenance issues that need to be documented for insurance purposes." The concierge consulted his computer screen, then handed me a key card. "Apartment 847. Please return this when you're finished." "Of course." The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt like the longest 2 minutes of my life. I was about to enter the secret world my wife had been building for over a year, the alternate reality where she was Jenna Ardell instead of Jenna Merrick, where she was planning a future that didn't include me. The apartment was smaller than I'd expected, but beautifully furnished. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the Willamette River, while carefully chosen art and furniture created an atmosphere of sophisticated comfort. This wasn't a temporary love nest. It was a permanent residence, designed for someone who intended to live here long-term. I moved through the space systematically, photographing everything. The kitchen was fully stocked with Jenna's favorite foods and wines. The bedroom contained clothes I recognized alongside items I'd never seen. The bathroom held 2 sets of toiletries, one clearly feminine, the other masculine. In the living room, I found what I was looking for: a desk area where Jenna had been managing her parallel life. Bank statements, lease agreements, and correspondence with her family were organized in neat files. I photographed everything, then used Ray's document scanner to create digital copies of the most important items. The correspondence was particularly revealing. Email printouts showed detailed discussions between Jenna and her mother about transition planning and emotional support systems. Her brother had provided financial advice about asset protection and tax implications of divorce. Even her sister in California had been consulted about the best way to minimize trauma during the separation process. My entire extended family-in-law had been actively planning my divorce while attending our holiday dinners and anniversary celebrations. In the bedroom, I found a journal Jenna had been keeping. The entries chronicled her growing dissatisfaction with our marriage, her meeting Damon at a business conference, and her family's encouragement to explore her options, rather than trying to fix what they saw as a fundamentally incompatible relationship. One entry, dated 6 months ago, was particularly illuminating. "Damon understands me in ways Cole never has. He sees my ambition as attractive rather than threatening, and he doesn't try to make me smaller to fit into his idea of what a wife should be. Mom is right. I deserve to be with someone who appreciates all of me, not just the parts that make him comfortable." The characterization stung because it contained just enough truth to be believable. I had been threatened by Jenna's ambition sometimes, especially when her career success highlighted my own professional limitations. I had occasionally made comments about her work schedule that probably sounded like criticism rather than concern. But I'd also supported her through graduate school, celebrated her promotions, and encouraged her to take risks I wouldn't have taken myself. The version of me in her journal was real, but incomplete. A selective editing of our relationship that justified her choices while ignoring inconvenient contradictions. I photographed the journal entries, then returned everything to its original position. The apartment felt like a museum exhibit, the secret life of someone you thought you knew. Every detail had been carefully curated to support a narrative about personal growth and authentic living. But underneath the sophisticated furnishing and philosophical justifications, it was still just an expensive place to conduct an affair. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Found Damon's second phone. You're not going to believe what's on it." I left the Pearl District apartment and drove to Tessa's house in Lake Oswego, a craftsman-style home that reflected her aesthetic sensibilities and business success. She met me at the door with a grim expression and a smartphone I didn't recognize. "He hid it in his home office," she said, leading me to her kitchen table. "Taped under a drawer where he thought I'd never look. The messages go back over a year." She handed me the phone, and I scrolled through text conversations between Damon and Jenna that were far more revealing than anything I'd found in the apartment. These weren't just the communications of two people having an affair. They were the strategic discussions of two people planning a coordinated deception. "Your husband's good at this," I said, reading a message where Damon advised Jenna on how to gradually prepare me for the end of our marriage without arousing suspicion. "Apparently, he's had practice. I called his first ex-wife this morning." Tessa's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Similar pattern. Long courtship while she was married to someone else, family money involved, eventual divorce that left the husband confused about what had happened. Professional marriage wrecker. With excellent references from my mother-in-law, apparently. She knew about his history when she started paying him." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Jenna's family hadn't just enabled her affair, they'd hired someone with specific expertise in breaking up marriages while making the betrayed spouse feel like the separation was mutual and inevitable. "There's something else," Tessa said, pulling up a different message thread. "They're planning to make their relationship public next month. Jenna's going to have the separation conversation with you after Thanksgiving, then introduce Damon as someone she met recently who's helping her through the transition." I read the messages detailing their timeline for revelation and legitimization. By Christmas, they'd be openly dating. By Valentine's Day, they'd probably be engaged. By next summer, they'd be married, with a story about finding love after the mature dissolution of their previous relationships. Elegant, I admitted. If I hadn't discovered the apartment, I might have believed the whole narrative. Jenna would have seemed like someone who'd grown beyond our marriage, rather than someone who'd been systematically betraying it. "What do you want to do?" I thought about Jenna's journal entries, her family's coordination, and the careful timeline for my emotional manipulation. They'd planned everything except for the possibility that I might discover their scheme and decide to respond in kind. "I want to disrupt their timeline," I said. "Instead of waiting for Jenna to control the narrative, I want to force a confrontation on my terms." "How?" I outlined the plan I'd been developing since my visit to the apartment. Jenna and Damon thought they had until after Thanksgiving to prepare for their revelation. Instead, they were going to face exposure this weekend in front of both their families, with no opportunity to spin the story or control the damage. "That's ruthless," Tessa said when I finished explaining. "They've been ruthless for over a year. I'm just returning the favor." "What do you need from me?" "Documentation of everything we found, coordination with both our attorneys, and your presence at Sunday dinner." "Sunday dinner?" "My parents are hosting their annual early Thanksgiving celebration this weekend. Jenna's family will be there, along with my family and several family friends. It's the perfect setting for a public revelation." Tessa was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "You want to destroy their relationship in front of everyone they know." "I want to show everyone exactly what kind of people they really are. And if it backfires, if they manage to turn it around and make us look like the villains, then we'll deal with the consequences. But I don't think they will. People like Jenna and Damon are used to controlling narratives and managing perceptions. They're not prepared for someone who refuses to play by their rules." That evening, I called my mother to confirm the guest list for Sunday's dinner and to mention that I'd be bringing a colleague who was new to Portland and didn't have family in the area. My mother, who believed in hospitality above all else, immediately insisted that Tessa would be welcome. "What's her name, dear?" "Tessa Vossel. She runs a marketing firm." "Vossel? That name sounds familiar. Do we know her family?" "I don't think so, Mom. She's originally from California." "Well, I'm sure she'll be lovely. Should I plan for any dietary restrictions?" She eats everything. Thanks for including her. Of course, sweetheart. Family dinner is always better with new friends. If only she knew what kind of friend I was bringing. Saturday morning, Jenna called from Seattle to check in. Her voice was bright with the kind of happiness that came from living authentically for the first time in months. The conference has been amazing, she said. Really eye-opening presentations about leadership development and organizational change. That's great. Learning a lot? So much. I'm actually thinking about extending my stay through Monday. There are some optional workshops that could be really valuable for my career. Optional workshops? Right. Whatever you think is best, I said. I'll miss you, but I know how important this is for your professional development. You're the best husband ever. I don't deserve you. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Drive safely when you come home. I will. Love you. Love you too. After she hung up, I sat in our kitchen drinking coffee and thinking about the conversation we'd have when she returned. Not the conversation she was planning, the careful, philosophical discussion about growing apart and wanting different things. The conversation I was planning, the one where she'd have to explain her secret apartment, her family's financial conspiracy, and her year-long deception while standing in the wreckage of every relationship she valued. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, one of those November days in Portland when the light seems sharper and the colors more vivid. I stood at my kitchen window, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood prepare for the weekend. Families loading into cars for church, joggers bundling up against the chill, normal people living normal lives. In 6 hours, I would destroy my marriage in front of both our families. I'd spent the morning making final preparations. The evidence was organized into presentation folders, photographs, financial records, correspondence, and timeline documentation that would make denial impossible. Tessa had confirmed she'd be there, bringing her own evidence of Damon's deception. Our attorneys were standing by for the legal aftermath. Everything was ready, except me. I kept thinking about Jenna's voice on the phone yesterday, bright with genuine happiness as she told me about her conference. For the first time in months, she'd sounded like the woman I'd fallen in love with, enthusiastic, optimistic, fully engaged with life. The fact that her happiness came from betraying me didn't diminish its authenticity. That was the part that hurt most. Not the deception itself, but the realization that Jenna was genuinely happier without me. Her secret life wasn't just an escape from our marriage, it was a return to herself, to the person she'd been before we'd settled into comfortable routines and quiet compromises. Maybe that should have made me reconsider what I was about to do. Maybe a better man would have let her go quietly, accepted the philosophical explanation about growing apart, and wished her well in her new life. But I wasn't a better man. I was a man who'd been systematically deceived by someone who'd promised to love and honor me. I was a man whose in-laws had conspired against him while accepting his hospitality and affection. I was a man who'd discovered that his wife's happiness required not just leaving him, but erasing him from her story entirely. So I was going to make sure that when Jenna told people about the end of our marriage, she'd have to include the part about the secret apartment and the paid boyfriend and the family conspiracy. She'd have to own the choices she'd made instead of hiding behind narratives about personal growth and mutual separation. At 2 o'clock, I drove to my parents' house in southeast Portland, the same modest ranch where I'd grown up and where Sunday family dinners had been a tradition for as long as I could remember. My mother had outdone herself with the decorations, autumn leaves, pumpkins, and candles that made the house feel warm and welcoming. "Cole," she said, greeting me with a hug at the front door. "You're early." "Good, I can use help in the kitchen." "Actually, Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad first, privately." Something in my tone made her step back and study my face. "Is everything all right? Where's Jenna?" "That's what I need to talk to you about." I found my father in the living room, watching football with the sound turned down. He was 72, retired from a career in construction management, and had the kind of practical wisdom that came from solving problems for 40 years. Dad, can you turn that off? I need to tell you both something before the rest of the family arrives. He muted the television and joined my mother on the couch. I sat across from them, noting how they automatically reached for each other's hands, a gesture of mutual support that had probably sustained their marriage through 5 decades of challenges. Jenna and I are getting divorced, I said without preamble. She's been having an affair for over a year, and her family has been helping her plan her exit from our marriage. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, Cole, are you sure? I'm sure. I have documentation. I pulled out one of the evidence folders and showed them the photographs of Jenna and Damon, the lease for the secret apartment, and the financial records showing her family's involvement. My father studied the documents with the methodical attention he'd once brought to construction blueprints. This is comprehensive, he said finally. You've been investigating this for a while. Weeks. And today, when her family arrives for dinner, I'm going to confront them with everything. Here? My mother looked stricken. Cole, honey, maybe that's not the best. It's the perfect place, Mom. They've been sitting at your table for 8 years, accepting your hospitality while planning to destroy your son's marriage. They deserve to be exposed in front of everyone they've been lying to. My parents exchanged a look that contained decades of marital communication. They were processing not just the information I'd given them, but the implications of what I was planning to do. What do you need from us? My father asked. I need you to let me handle this my way. Don't try to stop me. Don't try to protect anyone's feelings, and don't try to smooth things over afterward. This family has been treating me like an inconvenience for over a year. Today, they're going to understand that I'm actually a problem. My mother was crying quietly, and I felt a stab of guilt about involving them in my revenge. But they deserved to know why their daughter-in-law had been increasingly distant, why family gatherings had felt strained, why their son's marriage had been slowly dissolving despite appearing normal from the outside. I'm sorry you have to see this, I said, but I couldn't let them continue the charade. Don't apologize, my father said firmly. You didn't create this situation. You're just refusing to be a victim of it. The first guests arrived at 3:30, my sister Sarah and her husband, followed by my uncle and aunt. I'd briefed Sarah about the situation over the phone, and she'd agreed to provide moral support without interfering. The others would learn everything soon enough. Jenna's family arrived together at 4 o'clock, her parents, her brother Reed, and his wife. They came bearing wine and appetizers, smiling and cheerful, ready to celebrate family and gratitude on this early Thanksgiving gathering. I watched them hug my parents, compliment my mother's decorations, and settle into the comfortable familiarity of extended family relationships. Evelyn Ardell, Jenna's mother, asked about my work with the same polite interest she'd shown for 8 years. Reed discussed investment strategies with my father. Everyone played their roles perfectly. Where's Jenna? Evelyn asked as we gathered in the living room for pre-dinner drinks. She's at a conference in Seattle, I said. Leadership development. She sends her love. Oh, that's too bad. I was looking forward to hearing about her new projects at work. The casual lie came so easily to her that I almost admired the technique. Evelyn knew exactly where her daughter was and who she was with, but she could express disappointment about missing her with perfect sincerity. At 4:45, the doorbell rang again. I answered it myself, finding Tessa on the front porch. She was dressed conservatively in a navy dress and cardigan, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of nervous smile appropriate for meeting her colleague's family for the first time. Everyone, I said, returning to the living room with Tessa beside me. I'd like you to meet Tessa Vossel. She runs a marketing firm here in Portland, and she's new to the area. Tessa smiled and shook hands around the room, accepting my mother's offer of wine and settling into the conversation with the ease of someone comfortable in social situations. No one seemed to recognize her name or suspect that her presence was anything other than professional courtesy. We made small talk for 20 minutes. Work, weather, holiday plans, normal family gathering conversation, the kind of comfortable dialogue that had characterized these dinners for years. I participated while watching Jenna's family, noting how relaxed they seemed, how confident in their secret. That confidence was about to be shattered. "Before we sit down for dinner," I said, standing up in the center of the room, "I have something I need to share with everyone." The conversation died as all eyes turned to me. My mother looked worried, my father looked grim, and Jenna's family looked mildly curious about what I might want to announce. "For the past year and a half," I said, "Jenna has been living a double life. She's been having an affair with a man named Damon Vossel, maintaining a secret apartment in the Pearl District, and planning to divorce me with the financial and emotional support of her family." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke, no one seemed to breathe. Then Evelyn Ardell set down her wine glass with a sharp click. "Cole, I think you're confused about Tessa," I said, turning to my guest. "Would you like to introduce yourself properly?" Tessa stood up, her nervousness replaced by cold determination. "I'm Tessa Vossel, Damon's wife, and I have photographs of your daughter with my husband, financial records showing your payments to him, and documentation of their affair going back 14 months. The explosion was immediate and chaotic. Reed jumped to his feet, demanding to know what kind of game I was playing. Evelyn started crying and insisting there had been some mistake. Jenna's father, who rarely spoke at family gatherings, began shouting about invasion of privacy and legal consequences. My own family sat in stunned silence, watching the Ardells reveal themselves as the people they actually were, instead of the people they'd been pretending to be. "Sit down," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "All of you, and let me explain exactly what your daughter has been doing." I opened the evidence folders and began laying out photographs on my mother's coffee table. Jenna and Damon entering the apartment building, bank statements showing Ardell family transfers, lease documents signed by Reed, email correspondence about transition planning. "This isn't just an affair," I said as the room fell silent again. "This is a coordinated campaign of deception involving multiple family members and significant financial resources. You've been planning my divorce while sitting at my parents' table, accepting their hospitality, and pretending to care about their son's happiness." Evelyn was crying openly now, but her tears looked more like frustration than genuine remorse. "You don't understand the situation. Jenna has been unhappy for months. We were just trying to help her figure out what she wanted. By paying another woman's husband to seduce her?" "Damon isn't," Reed started to say, then stopped as he realized there was no good way to finish that sentence. Tessa stepped forward, her own evidence folder in hand. "Damon has done this before. Twice. He specializes in breaking up marriages for money, and you hired him to destroy Cole's marriage while making your daughter feel like she was finding true love." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I watched Jenna's family process the implications, that their carefully planned intervention had been orchestrated by a professional con artist, that their daughter's happiness was built on purchased affection, that they'd been manipulated as thoroughly as I had. "Where is she?" Evelyn asked finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Where is Jenna?" "In Seattle with your employee," I said, "probably planning how to break the news to me gently after Thanksgiving. Except now she's going to come home to find that everyone already knows exactly what kind of person she's chosen to become." My father stood up, his face flushed with an anger I'd rarely seen. "I want all of you out of my house, now." "Mr. Merrick, please," Reed began. "Now," my father repeated, "and don't come back. Ever." Jenna's family gathered their things in shameful silence, avoiding eye contact with anyone as they prepared to leave. At the door, Evelyn turned back one last time. "Cole, I hope you understand that we never meant to hurt you. We just wanted Jenna to be happy." "She is happy," I said. "That's the problem. She's happy because she's been lying to me for over a year while you helped her plan her escape. But now everyone knows what that happiness cost." After they left, My family sat in the living room surrounded by the evidence of my wife's betrayal, trying to process what had just happened. My mother was crying quietly, my father was pacing, and Sarah was studying the photographs with the analytical attention of someone who worked with financial documents professionally. "What happens now?" my mother asked. "Now Jenna comes home to discover that her secret is public, her family is exposed, and her carefully planned timeline is destroyed." I began gathering the evidence folders. "She'll probably try to make me the villain, the suspicious husband who violated her privacy and ruined her chance at happiness." "Will you give her that chance?" Tessa asked. I thought about Jenna's journal entries, her philosophical questions about personal growth, and her plans to present our divorce as a mutual decision between two people who'd grown apart. "No," I said. "She gave up the right to control the narrative when she decided to build her new life on lies." My phone was already buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, probably Jenna's family trying to reach me, or Jenna herself if they'd managed to contact her in Seattle. I let them all go to voicemail. Tomorrow I would deal with the legal aftermath, the financial separation, and the complex logistics of ending a marriage that had already been over for more than a year. Tomorrow I would face whatever story Jenna decided to tell about my behavior and her choices. But today, I had accomplished what I'd set out to do. I had shown everyone exactly what kind of people they really were, stripped away the careful narratives and philosophical justifications, and forced them to confront the ugly reality of their choices. Jenna wanted to evolve our relationship? Mission accomplished. We had definitely evolved, from a marriage based on love and trust to a war based on truth and consequences. And in that war, I had just won the most important battle. The phone kept buzzing. I turned it off and helped my mother clear away the evidence of the afternoon's destruction. Some battles were worth fighting, even if victory felt like another kind of loss. Especially then.